The sun was already high in the sky when Mark started his journey into the remote desert region. The heat pressed down on him like a heavy blanket, and the dry, cracked earth made every step a small challenge. He had always been drawn to exploring places most people avoided, the kind of areas where nature ruled and human presence felt almost insignificant. Today, he wanted to experience the quiet of the desert, the kind of silence that made a person feel like they were the only one left in the world. Mark's Jeep rattled along a narrow dirt road, the tires kicking up dust that shimmered in the sunlight. He was alone, with only a backpack, some water, and a camera to document his adventure. The map he carried showed a few paths that led deeper into the desert, places that were rarely visited and almost never marked. He had chosen one of these paths, feeling a strange excitement at the thought of going where no one else might be that day. After a couple of hours of driving, the path became rougher. Rocks jutted out from the ground, and the wheels of the Jeep struggled to stay steady. Mark had to get out and walk a short distance, guiding the vehicle carefully over the uneven terrain. That's when he noticed something unusual in the distance, near a rocky outcrop. At first, it looked like a shadow, just another part of the rocks. But as he got closer, he realized it was moving, a small, fragile movement that did not belong to the desert itself. Curiosity pushed him forward. As he drew closer, he could see her clearly for the first time. A woman, appearing to be in her late 20s, struggling with a rope that seemed to have caught around her ankle. Her clothes were simple but clearly worn, and her dark hair was tangled from the wind. She was trying to pull herself free, but the rope held fast. Mark's heart raced as he saw how trapped she was. He knew he had to act quickly. The desert was merciless, and any delay could turn dangerous. "Hey, are you okay?" he shouted, trying to get her attention. She looked up, startled, and her eyes widened with fear. It was clear she didn't expect anyone to be there. For a moment she hesitated, unsure if she could trust him. The desert could be dangerous, and strangers were not always friendly. But she seemed too exhausted and focused on freeing herself to be suspicious for long. Mark moved closer, careful not to startle her. "I can help you," he said calmly. "You're caught, right? Let me help you get free." She nodded, relief washing over her face, but she still seemed wary. Her hands shook as she tried to pull at the rope again. Mark crouched down, examining the situation. The rope had twisted around a rock, and it would take a careful touch to release it without hurting her. He worked methodically, loosening the knots while speaking softly to reassure her. Finally, with a gentle tug, the rope came loose. She fell back onto the warm sand, breathing heavily but free at last. Mark stepped back and watched her for a moment. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "No, I think I'm okay," she said, her voice soft but steady. There was a strange calmness about her, even after the fear. Her eyes held a depth that made Mark pause. He had seen many people in distress, but something about her presence was different. It was not just fear or vulnerability. There was strength there, quiet but undeniable. Mark offered her some water from his backpack. She took it hesitantly, her hands brushing against his. He noticed the faint scars on her wrists and arms, marks that told stories he could only guess at. She drank slowly, and when she was done, she handed the bottle back with a small, almost shy nod of thanks. I don't know how to thank you," she said finally. Her accent was unusual, not something Mark could place immediately. It had a rhythm that reminded him of old stories he had read about people who lived far from cities, people who belonged to the land in a way he could barely imagine. "You don't have to thank me," he said, smiling. "I just couldn't leave you there. You might have been hurt." She looked down for a moment, then back at him. "It's not common," she said slowly. "People usually just pass by." There was a hint of sadness in her tone, a quiet disappointment that made Mark feel a pang of empathy. He realized then that her life was probably not an easy one, and that this encounter might have been as unusual for her as it was for him. They sat together on a flat rock nearby, catching their breath and observing the endless desert around them. The silence was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was as if the desert itself had paused to watch this unexpected meeting. Mark finally asked, "What were you doing out here alone?" The woman hesitated. I needed to be," she said. Her eyes wandered to the horizon, where the sun had begun its slow descent. "I needed to be away from everything." There was a pain in her voice, a quiet struggle that Mark could feel even without knowing the full story. Mark didn't press. Sometimes silence was enough. They sat together, letting the wind carry the sand around them, each lost in their own thoughts. He noticed the way her fingers absent-mindedly traced patterns in the sand, a kind of rhythm that felt like meditation. It was calming, almost hypnotic. After a while, she looked up at him again. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice gentle but curious. It was not just a question. It was an invitation to share something real, something beyond the ordinary. Mark thought for a moment. "Because it felt right," he said finally. "I couldn't just walk away. No one deserves to be trapped and scared, not here, not anywhere." She studied him carefully, as if weighing his words against her own experiences. Then slowly, she nodded. You are not like others," she said. There was a softness in her voice now, a hint of trust beginning to form. Mark realized that the moment of rescue had shifted into something more profound. This was not just a chance encounter. It was the beginning of a connection neither of them could have anticipated. As the sun continued to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, Mark felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. Who was this woman? Why was she alone here? And why did her presence feel so significant, so compelling? He had rescued her, yes, but already he sensed that she might change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Finally, she stood and dusted off the sand from her clothes. "I should move on," she said quietly, but before she could walk away, she turned to him. "I will never forget what you did for me today." Mark smiled. "You don't have to. Just take care of yourself." She nodded once more, then disappeared into the shadows of the rocks and the fading light. Mark watched her go, feeling a strange emptiness where her presence had been, and yet a sense of wonder, too. This encounter, fleeting as it seemed, had left a mark on him. He did not yet know how, but he knew the story of this day was only beginning. Mark returned to his jeep, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? Why was she in such a dangerous place alone? And what had she meant by saying he was not like others? He had acted out of instinct, out of a simple desire to help, but now he felt as if he had stepped into a story much larger than himself. As he drove slowly back along the dusty path, the desert stretching endlessly in all directions, Mark realized that this was no ordinary adventure. He had come seeking solitude and quiet, but instead, he had found a human story, raw and powerful, that was just beginning to unfold. And somewhere ahead, hidden among the rocks and the setting sun, the woman he had rescued carried a secret, one that he could not yet imagine, a secret that might change both their lives forever. After the encounter in the desert, Mark couldn't shake the image of the Apache woman from his mind. Her dark, intense eyes, the calm strength in her posture, and the mystery surrounding her lingered like a shadow, refusing to leave him even as he returned home. Days passed, yet he found himself replaying the events over and over. What had brought her to that remote, dangerous place? Why was she alone? And why did her presence feel so unforgettable? He returned to his usual life, walking the familiar streets of the town he lived in. Everything looked normal, ordinary even. Yet inside him, something had shifted. The desert encounter had awakened a curiosity he couldn't ignore. He began searching for any clue about the woman. He asked around discreetly, visiting nearby small towns and settlements, hoping someone might have seen her. The locals offered nothing but vague answers. A few claimed they had spotted a solitary woman moving through the desert weeks before, always alone, always disappearing before anyone could approach. Mark's persistence grew, not out of obsession, but out of a deep need to understand. He studied the desert on maps, tracing the paths he had taken, trying to imagine her journey. He recalled how she had spoken. Her accent so unique it didn't seem tied to any language he knew well. And yet, in her voice, there was a rhythm, a melody that hinted at something ancient, something connected to the land itself. One evening, as he sat by a small campfire near the edge of the desert, he thought of her again. He imagined her walking among the rocks and sand, her movements careful yet purposeful. He pictured her hands tracing invisible patterns in the earth, her eyes scanning the horizon for dangers only she could sense. It struck him that she was not just a woman lost or in trouble. She carried with her an entire world he had never seen. Determined to learn more, Mark returned to the desert the following weekend. The sun had not yet risen, and the chill in the air made the rocks shimmer in a delicate light. He moved carefully, following the same path he had taken when he first found her. The wind whispered across the sand, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and dry grass. It was as if the desert itself was alive, watching, waiting. Hours passed without a trace. The silence of the desert pressed against him, heavy and constant. Then, in the distance, he noticed a flicker of movement. He froze, unsure if he had imagined it. But as he watched, a figure appeared, moving with grace and precision among the rocks. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be her? As he approached, he saw her clearly. The same dark hair, the same quiet strength, and the same presence that had captivated him days before. She was gathering herbs, her movements deliberate and practiced. Mark watched from a distance, careful not to startle her. He realized that she had not simply been lost in the desert that day. She had been living here, thriving in a world he barely understood. Finally, he stepped forward cautiously. "Hello," he said softly, his voice carrying across the rocks. She froze for a moment, then turned to face him. Her eyes narrowed, assessing, cautious, but not hostile. "You came back," she said, her voice calm, almost as if she had expected him. "I needed to see you again," Mark admitted. "I wanted to make sure you were okay, and maybe to understand who you are." There was a pause. Then she gestured for him to sit on a nearby boulder. "You ask many questions," she said. "Few people care enough to ask. Most only look for themselves, not for others." Mark nodded. "I wanted to help, and I still do. But I also want to understand you, your life, why you are here." The woman studied him for a long moment, her gaze steady and thoughtful. Then she spoke, slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. "I am of the Apache people. My life, it is tied to this land, to the mountains, the desert, the wind, the sun. Everything you see, it belongs to us. It speaks to us, guides us, protects us." Mark listened intently, realizing that her words carried more than meaning. They carried history, tradition, and a profound connection to the earth. He had read about Native American cultures before, but nothing in books could compare to hearing someone describe life through experience, living in harmony with the land, understanding its moods, and respecting its power. She continued, "I am alone by choice, though not without reason. There are those who cannot understand our ways. They bring danger, or they take what should remain sacred. I must move carefully. I must survive. Mark felt a surge of respect. Here was a woman who had faced danger, who lived fully aware of every risk, yet moved with a grace and intelligence that most people lacked. "You are incredible," he said softly. "I can't imagine what it's like to live as you do." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "And yet, you helped me without hesitation. You risked yourself without knowing me, without expecting anything. That is unusual. That is rare." Mark felt a strange warmth at her words. He had acted instinctively, without thinking of reward or recognition, but hearing her appreciation and the way she spoke of it made him realize that his action mattered more than he had imagined. There was a moment of silence. The desert stretched endlessly around them, silent and watchful. Mark noticed the way the wind shaped the sand, creating patterns that seemed to speak a language of their own. And in that silence, he began to understand why she lived this way, why the desert, harsh and unforgiving, was also a place of wisdom, strength, and quiet beauty. Then she spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. "You may not understand now, but there are gifts in this world, gifts that cannot be earned, only received. You have acted with courage. You have acted with kindness. For that, there is a debt." Mark frowned slightly, puzzled. "A debt?" She nodded. "In our ways, when someone helps another without asking, there is balance. The world seeks balance. What is given must be returned, in some form." He felt a shiver run down his spine. Something in her tone, her words, carried weight. It was not a threat, not a warning, but a promise. He realized that helping her had started a chain of events he could not yet understand. And somehow he knew her next action would surprise him. For the rest of the afternoon, they talked. She taught him small things about the land, which plants could heal, which signs in the sky meant a storm was coming, how to read the tracks of animals. Every lesson was small but profound, offering him glimpses into a world he had never known. Mark asked questions eagerly, but he also listened, realizing that her knowledge came not from books, but from living, observing, and surviving. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the desert in golden and crimson hues, she stood and began to gather her belongings. "It is time for me to move," she said. "The desert changes at night. Shadows become dangerous. I must be careful." Mark wanted to say more, to ask her to stay, but he knew he could not. She belonged to the desert, not to him. Still, he felt a strange pull, a desire to remain close, to learn more, to understand everything about this woman who had entered his life so suddenly and left a mark he could not forget. Before leaving, she turned to him, her expression serious. "Remember what I said. There is a balance. There will come a time when you understand why this meeting was not by chance. There will come a time when the gift I offer will be revealed." Mark's heart pounded. "A gift?" She nodded once, her eyes holding his gaze for a long moment. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared into the rocks and shadows, moving with a silent grace that made him wonder if he had imagined part of her presence. Mark stayed where he was, watching the desert swallow her figure. The wind carried a whisper that sounded almost like her voice, a reminder that this encounter was more than a simple rescue. He felt a strange mix of awe, curiosity, and anticipation. Who was she, really? What did she mean by a gift? And how would he ever see her again? As night fell, the desert cooled, and Mark finally made his way back to his jeep. His mind was racing with questions, and he felt a deep sense of connection, not only to the woman, but to the land itself. This was no ordinary encounter. It was the beginning of a journey, a story he could not yet fully understand, but one he knew would change him forever. Driving home under the stars, he glanced at the horizon where the desert met the sky, knowing that somewhere out there, the Apache woman moved with purpose, carrying secrets, wisdom, and a gift he could not yet imagine. And he understood that he would not rest until he uncovered the truth of her life, her culture, and the unexpected bond that had formed between them in the heart of the desert. Mark could not stop thinking about the Apache woman. Her words about balance, the gift, and the life she led in the desert had left a deep impression on him. Each day he found himself returning to the same thoughts. What did she mean by a gift? And why did he feel so strongly that this encounter was no accident? The questions grew in his mind, building a quiet obsession, but it was not a dark one. It was curiosity, a need to understand something extraordinary. One morning, he decided to return to the desert once again. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and the sun had just begun to warm the rocks. Mark drove along the same winding path he had taken before, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He felt a strange mix of excitement and anxiety, as if the desert itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed. The desert stretched endlessly, the sand shimmering in gold and copper under the bright sunlight. He had almost begun to think that he would not find her when he saw a flicker of movement among the rocks. His heart leapt. Could it really be her again? As he approached cautiously, he saw her clearly. She was sitting on a large flat rock, carefully arranging a small bundle of herbs and stones. The wind moved gently through her hair, and she seemed entirely at peace, her focus complete. Mark did not want to disturb her, but he also knew he had to speak to her. "She is here," he whispered to himself. "She is really here." He stepped forward slowly. "I came back," he said softly. "I needed to see you." The woman looked up. Her eyes, deep and unreadable, met his. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then she nodded slightly, as if she had expected him all along. "You came," she said, her voice calm, almost musical. "You are persistent, and you are curious. That is rare." Mark smiled nervously. "I can't help it. I need to understand everything. Why you were alone, why you live this way, and about the gift you mentioned." The woman's eyes softened, a hint of a smile appearing on her lips. She gestured for him to sit beside her. "The gift is not something simple," she said. "It is not gold or jewels. It is not something you can buy or trade. It is something important, something that carries meaning far beyond what you know." Mark leaned in, eager to hear more. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the excitement building inside him. The woman reached into the bundle beside her and pulled out a small object wrapped carefully in soft cloth. She held it with reverence, as if it were alive. "This is for you," she said. "It is something I offer because of what you did. You risked yourself for me without expecting anything in return. That cannot be ignored." Mark's hands trembled slightly as she placed the bundle in his lap. He felt its weight, both physical and emotional, without unwrapping it yet. I don't know if I should take this," he said. "I don't know if I deserve it." The woman shook her head gently. "You do, but you must understand. Taking this gift is also taking responsibility. It is a bond, not a possession. It is meant to teach, to guide, and to remind. Are you ready for that?" Mark nodded slowly. "I think I am," he said, though part of him was unsure. With that, she allowed him to unwrap the bundle. Inside was a small, intricately carved stone, smooth and polished. It had strange markings, symbols he did not recognize. And yet there was something familiar about them, as if they spoke directly to a part of him he did not know existed. The carvings seemed to shimmer slightly in the sunlight, and Mark felt an unexpected warmth radiating from it. "This is," he began, but the woman interrupted softly. "It is more than it seems," she said. "It carries the wisdom of my people, the balance of the land, and the memory of those who came before us. To hold it is to remember, to respect, and to learn. It is a gift, yes, but it is also a teacher." Mark turned the stone over in his hands, feeling its weight, its texture, and the power it seemed to hold. He realized then that this was not just an object. It was a bridge between worlds, a connection to something larger than himself. "You saved my life," she continued, "and in doing so, you have shown your heart. This stone, it is my way of honoring that, but it will not give you answers unless you are willing to seek them, to understand them. It is not a gift for the lazy or the impatient. Are you willing to try?" Mark's heart pounded in his chest. "Yes," he said firmly. "I want to understand. I want to learn." The woman studied him carefully, then nodded. "Good. That is all that matters. But remember, the path will not be easy. There will be moments when you doubt, when you question. The stone will guide you, but only if you listen, only if you respect what it represents." Mark felt a mix of awe and humility. He had expected a simple token of gratitude, maybe a story, perhaps a small item of value. But this was something entirely different. It carried weight, meaning, and responsibility. And he realized that his life had changed in an instant. For hours they sat together, and the woman began to teach him small lessons. She explained the importance of observation, of listening to the land, of understanding not only what is visible but also what is hidden. She spoke of the desert, the mountains, the plants, and the animals, each with its own language, its own way of communicating with those willing to pay attention. Mark listened intently, absorbing every word, every gesture, every lesson. He practiced what she taught him, noticing subtle signs he had never seen before, the tracks of small animals, the way the wind shifted the sand, the smell of certain plants that indicated water nearby. He realized that the stone in his hands was only a symbol. The real gift was the knowledge, the awareness, and the connection to the world she offered. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert, the woman stood in motion for Mark to do the same. "It is time," she said. "You have learned much today, but this is only the beginning. You must continue on your own. Continue to observe, to understand, and to respect." Mark looked at the stone once more, feeling its warmth, its weight, and the responsibility it carried. "I will," he promised. "I will honor this gift, and I will learn everything it can teach me." The woman smiled faintly. "Good. That is all I ask." She paused for a moment, then added, "And remember, the gift is not just for you. It carries a message for others as well. You must choose carefully when and how to share what you learn." Mark nodded, understanding the depth of her words. This was not just a personal lesson, it was a responsibility to carry wisdom forward, to honor her people, and to respect the connection she had offered. As darkness settled over the desert, the woman began to move away, disappearing into the shadows as silently as she had appeared. Mark watched her go, the stone still warm in his hands, and felt a mixture of awe, gratitude, and determination. He knew that this encounter had changed him forever. Driving home that night, he could not stop thinking about the lessons she had taught him. The desert had revealed itself as a teacher, the woman as a guide, and the stone as a symbol of balance, respect, and wisdom. He realized that life was full of unexpected encounters, and sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could lead to the most profound transformations. For the first time in his life, Mark understood that the world was full of mysteries waiting to be discovered, and he knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The gift had been offered, and now it was his responsibility to honor it, to learn from it, and to carry its message forward, even if he did not yet fully understand what that meant. The night sky stretched endlessly above him as he drove, stars shimmering like distant fires. Somewhere out there, the Apache woman moved through the desert, carrying her own wisdom and secrets. And somewhere in his own life, Mark carried a new sense of purpose, a new respect for the world, and the weight of a gift that would guide him in ways he could not yet imagine. After receiving the gift from the Apache woman, Mark returned home with a sense of awe that he had never felt before. The stone she had given him rested on his desk, wrapped carefully in soft cloth, as if waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets. Each time he glanced at it, a strange warmth seemed to radiate from it, as though it were alive in some quiet, unexplainable way. Mark couldn't sleep that night. His mind was full of thoughts about the desert, the woman, and the lessons she had shared. He tried to recall every word she had said, every gesture, every detail of how she had taught him to observe the world. The stone seemed to pulse in his hands whenever he held it, and he began to feel that it was calling him to understand its purpose. The next morning, Mark decided to take the stone outside into the quiet of the early dawn. He held it carefully and walked to a nearby hill overlooking the town, the first light of day casting golden hues across the landscape. Sitting on a rock, he closed his eyes and focused, trying to feel the connection the woman had spoken about. At first, nothing happened. But slowly, as he breathed in the cool morning air, he began to notice subtle patterns in the world around him. The way the wind moved through the grass, the song of the birds in the distance, even the tiny movements of insects on the ground. All of it seemed to have meaning. Mark felt as if the stone was teaching him to see the world as the Apache woman did, not just with his eyes, but with his senses, his heart, and his mind. Over the next few days, Mark dedicated himself to understanding the gift. He kept the stone close, observing its carvings, tracing the patterns with his fingers, and meditating on what they could mean. He felt a growing awareness of balance in everything, in nature, in his own actions, and in the connections between people. It was as if the stone were opening his mind to a perspective he had never imagined, one that blended respect, wisdom, and responsibility. Mark also began to research Apache culture in depth. He read books, watched documentaries, and listened to stories from elders who had shared their knowledge online. But nothing he read could compare to what he had felt and learned directly from the woman. The gift had given him an experience that was alive, something that could not be contained in words or pages. One evening, he returned to the desert with the stone, wanting to feel its energy in the place where it had truly been given. The desert at dusk was beautiful, quiet, and powerful. Shadows stretched long across the sand, and the wind whispered through the rocks as if speaking directly to him. He sat on a boulder, holding the stone tightly, and began to meditate, focusing on the lessons of observation and connection the woman had taught him. Hours passed, slowly. A realization began to dawn on him. The stone was not just a token of gratitude, it was a guide, a teacher, and a reminder. It carried the wisdom of her people, the understanding of balance between giving and receiving, and the responsibility that comes with kindness. It showed him that every action, no matter how small, created ripples that affected the world in ways he could not always see. Mark also realized that the woman's gift was teaching him patience. He had rushed through life, seeking results quickly and often ignoring the lessons along the way. The stone demanded observation, reflection, and mindfulness. Its purpose was not to provide immediate answers, but to awaken a deeper understanding that could only come through experience and awareness. In the following weeks, Mark began to apply the lessons of the stone in his daily life. He became more mindful of the people around him, noticing when someone needed help, offering kindness without expectation, and observing the small details that made life richer and more meaningful. Friends and family noticed the change in him. He was calmer, more thoughtful, and more aware of the world's subtle beauty. One afternoon, while walking along a trail in a nearby forest, Mark noticed something remarkable. He had always seen nature as beautiful, but now he could feel its rhythm, its language, and its balance. The rustle of the leaves, the distant call of a bird, even the movement of the clouds in the sky. All of it spoke to him in a way that was both humbling and inspiring. He realized that the stone had opened his eyes not just to the desert or the woman, but to the interconnectedness of everything around him. Mark also began to understand the deeper meaning of the gift in relation to the woman herself. She had trusted him with something precious, something that represented the values, history, and wisdom of her people. This trust was rare, and he felt honored beyond words. He realized that the stone was a bridge, a connection between her world and his, between her culture and his understanding. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Mark felt a sudden clarity. He understood that the gift was meant to change him, not to give him something material. It was meant to awaken a sense of responsibility, respect, and awareness that he could carry into every aspect of his life. The stone was a teacher, the woman was a guide, and the desert had been the classroom. The realization filled him with gratitude. He thought about how small acts of courage and kindness could ripple outward, creating change in ways he had never imagined. By rescuing her, he had set in motion a series of events that would continue to affect both their lives. And now, with the stone in his hands, he felt the weight of that responsibility, not as a burden, but as an honor. Mark also understood that the lessons of the stone were not meant to be kept to himself entirely. He felt a strong desire to share what he had learned, to honor the woman and her people by spreading awareness, respect, and kindness. But he also knew that this had to be done carefully, with reverence and understanding, so that the gift's meaning was never diluted or misinterpreted. In the weeks that followed, Mark continued to meditate with the stone, explore the desert, and reflect on the lessons he had received. Each day brought new insights, small yet powerful, that shaped the way he thought, acted, and connected with others. He felt a sense of peace he had never known before, a calm understanding of his place in the world and his responsibilities toward it. One night, as he sat beneath a sky full of stars, he thought of the woman. He wondered where she was, what she was doing, and if she knew the impact her gift had on him. He hoped that one day he might see her again, not just to express gratitude, but to share how profoundly she had changed him. Mark realized that the true gift was not the stone itself, but the transformation it had sparked within him. It had taught him to observe, to listen, to respect, and to act with compassion. It had opened his heart to a world he had only glimpsed before, and it had connected him to a culture, a land, and a person in a way that was deeply meaningful. As he held the stone and looked up at the stars, Mark made a silent promise. He would honor the gift, live with awareness, and carry forward the lessons he had learned. The stone was more than an object. It was a guide, a reminder, and a connection to something greater than himself. And he knew that the woman, in her quiet strength and wisdom, had given him something he could never repay, a chance to see the world in a new, deeper way. The desert, the woman, and the stone had changed his life forever. Mark understood now that some encounters are not mere accidents, but events that shape the course of one's life, and he was ready to carry the lessons forward, to honor the gift, and to live with the awareness, respect, and balance that it represented. After weeks of reflection and learning from the stone, Mark's life began to change in ways he had never imagined. Every morning he woke with a sense of purpose, carrying the lessons he had learned into his daily life. The world around him seemed sharper, more alive and full of meaning. Even the smallest things, the way the wind brushed through the trees, the way birds moved in synchronized flight, the patterns of shadows on the ground, all seemed to speak to him in a language he was finally starting to understand. At work, his friends noticed a difference in him. Mark was calmer, more patient, and more attentive to the people around him. He listened more, spoke less, and offered help without waiting to be asked. A coworker struggling with a personal problem confided in him one day, and Mark realized he could offer not just advice, but understanding. The lessons from the stone and the Apache woman had given him empathy he had never fully experienced before. Outside of work, Mark began exploring the desert again, not merely as an adventurer seeking thrills, but as someone who wanted to truly connect with the land. He followed the small signs he had learned to notice: tracks in the sand, subtle changes in the wind, the call of distant animals. Each journey brought new insights and a growing sense of harmony with the world. The stone, always with him, seemed to pulse gently when he paid attention, guiding him toward lessons he might otherwise have overlooked. One evening he sat on a familiar rock, gazing at the sunset that painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson. He held the stone in his hand and thought about the woman who had given it to him. He wondered where she was, what she was doing, and whether she knew how much she had changed his life. A feeling of gratitude washed over him so strong it almost brought tears to his eyes. He realized that some encounters in life were not fleeting. They were meant to leave a mark that lasts forever. Mark also began to understand the larger purpose of the gift. The stone had taught him more than just awareness. It had taught him responsibility. Every act of kindness, every thoughtful decision, every moment of observation mattered. He began to notice how the smallest choices could affect people, animals, and the environment around him. The lessons were subtle but powerful, guiding him toward a life of balance and mindfulness. As he walked back from the rock, Mark encountered a young boy struggling to carry a heavy backpack along the desert path. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and helped the boy, offering encouragement and a reassuring smile. The boy looked up at him, wide-eyed and grateful, and in that moment, Mark felt the ripple of the lessons he had learned from the woman and the stone. Helping her had set in motion a chain of kindness, and now he could continue it, spreading the understanding and respect he had received. Days turned into weeks, and Mark found himself more deeply connected to the people around him. He volunteered at local shelters, assisted neighbors in need, and shared stories about his adventures and the wisdom he had gained. People were drawn to him, not just for the stories he told, but for the calm, understanding presence he radiated. The gift had transformed him into someone who could inspire and guide others without ever trying. One afternoon, while walking along the edge of a quiet canyon, Mark felt a sudden awareness. The stone in his hand seemed to vibrate gently, almost like a heartbeat. He closed his eyes and listened, and for the first time, he felt as though he could understand a part of what the woman had meant when she spoke of balance and responsibility. The stone was not just a reminder of kindness or courage, it was a living connection to the world, a teacher that would continue to guide him if he chose to listen. Mark realized that his life would never be the same. The encounter with the Apache woman, the rescue, and the gift had set him on a path he could not have predicted. Every moment now carried a deeper significance, every choice a weight he could feel. But he no longer feared that weight. Instead, he embraced it, understanding that awareness and responsibility were gifts in themselves. He often returned to the desert at sunset, carrying the stone and reflecting on the lessons it offered. Sometimes he would see faint movements in the distance, shadows that reminded him of the woman. He never sought her out, understanding that she moved through the world on her own path, and that part of the gift was learning to respect her freedom and wisdom. One evening, as the stars began to fill the sky, Mark sat on a rock overlooking the desert. He held the stone tightly and whispered a silent promise: to honor the gift, to live with awareness, and to carry forward the lessons he had received. The desert was quiet, but the air seemed alive, carrying with it a feeling of approval, as if the land itself recognized his commitment. Mark also began sharing the stories he had learned, not as myths or legends, but as lessons in observation, empathy, and balance. He spoke to local schools, community groups, and anyone willing to listen. He never revealed the exact nature of the gift or the woman who had given it, knowing that respect and discretion were part of what she had taught him. Instead, he focused on the lessons, the importance of kindness, the awareness of one's surroundings, and the understanding that every action has meaning. Through this, Mark realized that the gift was not just for him. It was meant to ripple outward, affecting the lives of others in subtle, meaningful ways. By living the lessons he had learned, he could honor the woman, the stone, and the desert itself. He began to see that true impact comes not from grand gestures, but from consistent, thoughtful actions that reflect understanding and respect. One day, while helping a group of volunteers clean a local park, Mark noticed a small girl struggling to plant a tree. He knelt beside her, guiding her hands, showing her how to place it carefully into the soil. As they worked together, he felt the same warmth he had felt holding the stone in the desert. It was a reminder that even the simplest acts of care could carry profound significance, echoing the lessons he had learned from the woman. Mark also understood that life was full of mysteries, and that the encounter with the Apache woman had shown him a glimpse of a world beyond the ordinary. He had been given a gift that transcended material value, a connection to wisdom, awareness, and responsibility that would guide him for the rest of his life. And he knew that by honoring that gift, he could continue to grow, learn, and inspire others. As the years passed, Mark continued his explorations, his reflections, and his acts of kindness. The stone remained with him, a constant reminder of the desert, the woman, and the lessons they had shared. It had become more than an object. It was a symbol of his transformation, a teacher that shaped his actions and thoughts. Mark often thought back to the day he first rescued her. He remembered the fear, the tension, and the relief that followed. But he also remembered her eyes, deep, wise, and kind, and the words she had spoken about balance and gifts. That day had marked the beginning of a journey he could never have imagined, a journey that had changed him forever. And even though he never saw her again, he felt her presence in the lessons he carried, the actions he took, and the way he viewed the world. She had offered him a gift, yes, but it had been much more than a physical token. It was a doorway to understanding, a call to live with awareness, and a reminder that even the smallest acts of courage and kindness can shape lives in ways we cannot predict. Mark smiled as he walked through the desert one evening, the stone warm in his pocket, the sky painted with the colors of sunset. He knew that life was full of unexpected encounters, and that sometimes the people we meet, even for a brief moment, can leave a lasting mark on our hearts and minds. The Apache woman had done that for him. She had given him more than he could ever repay, and yet he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Mark realized that the gift was never meant to be kept to himself. It was a responsibility, a lesson, and a chance to make the world a better place, one act at a time. And as he stood in the quiet desert, feeling the wind on his face and the warmth of the stone in his hand, he understood that the journey was far from over. The lessons would continue, the awareness would deepen, and the gift would guide him for the rest of his life. With a final glance at the horizon, Mark whispered a silent thank you to the woman who had changed everything. The desert seemed to reply in its own way, the wind shifting gently, carrying a sense of approval and peace. Mark knew that he had been part of something extraordinary, and that the gift she had given him the stone, the lessons, the wisdom would continue to shape his life and the lives of those he touched forever.